Okay, welcome to this seminar that is part of the Twin Politics Ocean Seminar series based at the University of Vienna and part of the ERC-funded project Twin Politics. My name is Alice Vadreau and I'm a professor in international politics and the environment. I'm also the principal investigator of the ERC project Twin Politics. And we are running this ocean seminar series for some years now. Recently, we also joined the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And so this ocean seminar is a decade's activity. I have the pleasure to welcome our presenter for today, Professor Andrea Saltelli from the UPF Barcelona School of Management. I will introduce him briefly, but before this, I will just briefly outline the structure of the seminar. So we will first have a talk by Professor Saltelli, and then we will open the space for discussion, questions from your side. And before introducing our speaker and also the content of the lecture, just a few words about Twin Politics. So Twin Politics is funded by the European Research Council as part of its Consolidator grant scheme. It started in July 2024 and it will run till June 2029. We established an interdisciplinary research team that investigates the development of digital twins as a geopolitical phenomenon, specifically focusing on the area of the ocean. So we are particularly looking into digital ocean twins. And the focus of our study is to understand whether, and if so, how digital twins can also contribute to a fairer organization of multilateral negotiations in the future. So this Twin Politics Ocean Seminar series creates a space for discussion between experts from academia, policymaking, and NGOs to exchange ideas on ocean governance with a special focus on recent developments in data science and technology, particularly the digital twin of the ocean and their role in shaping policies and practices. So our research focuses on the ocean and specifically looks into the potential future of using digital twins in the area of plastic negotiations, deep seabed mining, and marine biodiversity conservation. But we, in the past, have invited scholars looking at digital twin, digital technologies in diverse areas of global environmental politics. This brings me to today's talk. So our speaker, Professor Andrea Saltelli, is a researcher known for his influential work on sensitivity analysis, mathematical modeling, and the ethics of quantification in science and public policy. He previously led the Econometrics and Applied Statistics Unit at the European Commission Joint Research Center and later served at the University of Bergen and the UPF Barcelona School of Management. His research examines how models and numerical indicators shape political and scientific decision-making, particularly under conditions of uncertainty. In recent years, he has become a prominent critic of overly technocratic approaches to digital twins of the Earth, arguing that such systems can oversimplify complex social and environmental realities. And his publications that you may also have seen and read explore the societal, ethical, and democratic implications of large-scale digital modeling. In today's lecture, Professor Saltelli will speak on digital twins of the Earth and how they subscribe to a reductionist view of nature as a machine. Since mathematical modeling is at the core of this digital enterprise, he will explore the limits of modeling and creating digital twins of the Earth by recalling some of the existing visions about the nature and function of mathematical models, mentioning also some historical precedents from the limits to growth debate. So, Professor Saltelli, I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this nice introduction. I will now try to share the slide. We did it before, so this should go now easily. Okay, I want to share this. Share. I want to I want to send it to full screen. Full screen. Are you watching to it full screen now?
Mm, yes,
Yes,
we.
perfect. So I can start. Okay, so this is a talk prepared around a book which is now in print, in press with Anthem Press. I hope it comes out in 2026, which is about the title is A Question of Powers, Models, Authority, and the Politics of Knowledge. Dunque, and so the talk will cover this point and also digital twins. I anticipate that I'm not expert at all in specific digital twins of the ocean. I really know nothing about that. So I hope some of the things I say resonate with what are your real concern. But so the idea is that the digital twin promise decision-ready knowledge of planetary system, but it rests on the quality of climate modeling. In turn, climate modeling credibility rests on the authority of science. And so when the twins speak, science speaks. And if the twins are doubted, science is doubted. This is something I try to connect. It's not an easy connection to make, but I'll give it a try. So this talk is about this chain of legitimacy, how it is built, what it can do, and what it cannot do. So my point is that mathematical modeling has become the epistemic center of climate science, and in turn, climate science has become to represent science. So this has also become an axis of polarization around the authority of science. Whether or not you agree with this diagnosis of mine, how did we get to this point? Well, I remember, I'm old enough to remember many years ago how this discussion started to emerge. Uh, there was a time where science was considered the ersatz religion of modernity. This is the work of Toulmin. And a few people gave warning signals on the danger of science. Some people in the 60s already, Dwight Eisenhower, the farewell speech, some of you may have heard about that. Paul Goodman during the Vietnam War in the 70s spoke about the corruption of science and the need for the reformation. And then, more and more precisely, Ulrich Beck in the late 80s. His work was then translated in the 90s. About the risk of science to society. But those few gentlemen, in a sense, lost the war. Who won then? Well, polarization won. So the diffidence towards science, which was once the preserve of a bunch of intellectual ecologists, philosophers, and the occasional president of the United States, is now the preserve of a large political families. And this article makes the point very effectively. And they say the polarization of trust in science is a complex phenomenon shaped by and increasingly also shaping political identity. So the relation between political identity and trust in science have become a sort of co-evolving nexus. It's very difficult to identify an error or causality. Though some people believe simplistically that because I am conservative, I doubt science, but this is not true. It was never true for a very long time. But nowadays, on all important matters involving the authority of science, for example, vaccine, think of the Barrington Declaration, climate, the DOE report very much criticized. The terrain is now divided along party lines, and opposing fields are there to fight one another. But confronted with this situation, one key point is that we cannot get our facts back. What I mean is that this war cannot be fought with the same instrument and weapons which led to the present situation. In other words, I want to give you a practical example. You may have heard about this book. This book ends with a sentence of like, we have truth and justice on our side. My thesis is that this is really not the right approach. This article you see here appeared on the glorious journal Minerva just this Monday, where I criticize along this line the work of Michael Mann, especially. So, in other words, let's go back to that. So, climate stands for science. Science stands for progressive, whatever this means, maybe Democrats in the USA. And the urgency of fighting an impending climatic catastrophe stands as the line separating civilization from barbarism. This is more or less the manual we receive reading a lot of important mainstream science, often on the journal which we like the most. I mean, The Guardian, the New York Times, and the like. But what do people who disagree have to say? Well, these people say that exactly as there is misinformation done for the right, there is also a sort of misinformation coming from the left. And this information, which goes under the name of highbrow misinformation, has to do with virtue signaling, with conspicuous cognition. What is conspicuous cognition? Well, you have conspicuous consumption, from Veblen. I own a lot of things I don't need just to show how powerful and rich I am. Conspicuous cognition is a display of knowledge which is meant to show my difference and it just signals that I am above the crowd of the deplorable, to use an unfortunate expression used by Hillary Clinton some time ago. So the allegiance to science becomes a marker of cultural identity and educational distinction. In turn, this is favored by a process of cultural educational certification, which has been going on for a long time. Now, let's look at this model of climate, which I'm criticizing in this talk. Where do they come from? Well, not many people know, but it can be easily shown that they come from the geopolitical infrastructure of Cold War. This model had a lot to do with nuclear war, fallout, roads for submarine war. And then, when the Cold War ended, they were redeployed in atmospheric science, studies of climate, and they came to the point where, and this is very well described by this beautiful book of Iron Omens, they come to dominate climate change research. So if you now talk about climate change, who does climate change? Modelers do it substantially, no? But, and this is very important, climate change isn't everything. It's not that climate change is not there, but it's not everything, and the point is very well made by climatologist Mike Hulme. Climate Change Isn't Everything is a very small booklet which I think everyone should read. And he makes the point that if you take the main narrative, physics is center stage with CO2, global mean temperature, emission, mitigation, and what is in the background, what is off stage, is biophysics, system ecology, pollution, society, and adaptation. We go back to this, I think, in the course of my talk. So all these scenarios of decarbonization, carbon budget, temperature target emerge from models. They are there because we have models. And those models translate, or if you wish, reduce heterogeneous processes like biological, physical, economic, and social into tractable computational form. So in a sense, and this is the lesson of this book, modeling create the future which we are allowed to consider and analyze, and which include all these aspects on which we may harbor some doubt, like the hydrogen economy, engineering for carbon capture. So these models script the narrative of how we can imagine our future. I think that we can have many visions of the future of the planetary harm, of the danger of the planet. One vision is messy, local. You can attribute it to someone. It has to do with indoor and outdoor air pollution, which you see on the two pictures on the left, on the right. Plastic in the ocean, the picture on the left, illegal dump site, hexavalent chromium, forever chemicals, eco-mafias, wars. In all these, science is seen, I'm afraid, as a driver of harm. And then you have this other vision, the second vision, global, linear, unified, greenhouse gas emission gently increase the temperature of the planet, but this will lead to some catastrophic event, and scientists are there to defend the planet. So To move from one vision to the another means move from systemic to reductionist, and to move from specific responsibility to a diffuse global stewardship. Forgive me for saying that I find it unsurprising that scientists themselves, administrators, entrepreneurs, and politicians prefer the second vision over the first, without forgetting tech philanthropies who are very much along these visions of technology will save us. I don't want now to enter into all what each of these gentlemen, each of these gentlemen does, because then this will take most of the presentation. But if you read the Climate Work Foundation report, you will see where the money goes. No, the money goes mostly to mitigation and not to adaptation. Mostly go to the global north and not to the global south. So there is also supply side in modeling. You can have in Vision 1 specific, modest local models, for example, of a reef system, a fishery, an estuary, or in Vision 2 you have an integrated assessment model and digital twin and ocean climate twin as the one you are considering studying in your project. And there is here an aspect of political economy of science is that scale is a source of epistemic authority. The bigger the model, the more the authority accruing to the modeler himself. Um, and then this also feed into, I call with some ecologist friend, expert in biophysics, the economy of technoscientific promises. No, the promises of transformation without transformation. Those are fantastic narrative of circular economy, geoengineering, rapid transition and decarbonization just around the corner. For those of you who know the work of Judith Corrigan, they know that these things bumps into the second law of thermodynamics. They bump into legacy effect against institutional constraints and so on and so forth. Since I'm Italian, when I find, when we confronted with a situation where everything changed so that nothing can change, we attribute this to the novel of Tommaso de Lampedusa, The Gattopardo, where the nephew of the prince rightly says, everything must change so that nothing will change. Okay, apologies for this very national quote. So we have a migration of epistemic authority. So the authority of science comes to be mediated by climate science. The authority of climate science is mediated by modeling and now by the twins. And the credibility of science is hence inseparable from the credibility of the model that sustain it. And coming then specifically to the twins, they are announced with a very optimistic framing. If you read what Nature writes about this, they are presented as something which will solve a lot of problems. In Europe, the twins fall under the European Destination Earth research project. And to many of us, this makes us think of Borges, the Argentinian writer, one-to-one map of the empire. In that empire, the art of cartography attained such a perfection that the map of a single province occupied the entirety of the city. So, of course, Borges did not know the digital twin, but in this piece is called, this novel, this fiction is called El rigor de la ciencia, no, the rigor of science. And this is really a fantastic way to ironically criticize what science does in a sense, or a certain way of doing science at least. Okay, so we have the story of the digital twins. For us, this is part of the Cartesian dream of human domination over nature. So humans as master and possessor of nature, which we can bend to our need. This is also the metaphor of nature as a machine, which is very well explained by Jeremy Lent. To be honest, I was a Cartesian dream myself for a long part of my life, in the sense that I had this idea that there wasn't a problem which could not be neatly computed, you know, and then possibly optimized and found a solution for. But when I look, I mean, with time, I reconsider some of this. When you look at how this is presented by for example, here, Euronews in Brussels, no? A complex computer model that takes into account weather and climate, a game changer in our fight against climate change. Today, the future is literally at our fingertips. And all these sentences come from the speech of a commissioner of the European Community, which is an organization where I worked myself for many years, though I would probably have written a different brief for this commissioner. Look, I said, nature as a machine, here you are, Euronews, European Commission, this is the way the planet is represented as a single, with a thermostat. By the way, what I find fantastic in this kind of vision of the um, how we can fight climate change is the idea that you move from a state of equilibrium to another state of equilibrium. But in system ecology, this is not warranted at all. Who told you that, you can move from a state of equilibrium to another state of equilibrium when you move from one temperature to another? This, is, there could be other transition than from equilibrium to equilibrium. And so here comes our polemical article, where with many colleagues, including Mike Hulme, but also Giorgio Gerenzer, a famous statistician, Roger Pilke is there, quite a bunch of authors. We criticize climate intelligence, decision-ready information, empowering citizens to become partners in knowledge generation. And then there is a profusion of ecological metaphors like digital ecosystem, data lakes, digital species. I mean, when I read this decision-ready information and empowering citizen, I'm surprised, I must say, I must admit. I find this very surprising. But then if this is surprising, why is that so many people buys this kind of narrative? Well, Patrick von Zwanenberg, in this article, which is open access on the book of Scones and Stirling, and so you can read it, make a very good diagnosis of why the European institutions, for example, are so vulnerable to this project, which are oriented to technological optimism. Some of these reasons are very easy to understand, also reasonable in the sense that the European Commission wants to have a standardized approach. The European Commission is afraid of paralysis by analysis, but some of these sensitivity, some of this vulnerability are truly linked to let me say, in a sense, the candid positivism, of the people in charge of this activity. And I was probably a candid positivist myself. This keyboard is very sensitive. Okay, so, if you want to read into this and read Van Zwanenberg, you can tell the story much better than I can do. Some people, share my vision. This is Andrew Stirling. He talks about misleading technocratic precision, and he criticizes the profusion of digit and promise of accuracy, which derive from expected utility, decision theory, life cycle assessment, ecosystem services, sound scientific decision. This comes from the lobbyist of tobacco, evidence-based policy. I'm particularly annoyed by ecosystem services because I find this extraordinary. Who told you that? Who told us that the ecosystem are there to provide services to human? But anyhow, this is the way they are used. And if I may say, maybe this is not your case. Probably this is not your case because you have many social scientists in your team, as I understand. The epistemic community doing the modeling is unconcerned about the digitalization of the real. So they are unconcerned about the linkages between digitalization of the real and democracy, for example. And this is on which Jaron Lanier has written many, many books. You probably heard about the age of surveillance capitalism. If you like, Byung-Chul Han, he also wrote about that. And the most radical of all, Dan McQuillan, talk about an anti-fascist approach to resisting artificial intelligence. Just to give you a spectrum, which cover different positions. Oh la la. Okay, so another criticism we have in our article is that, okay, so this code, these models are a source of financial intelligence, climate intelligence, where the financial market and private companies are in an arms race for selling those services. Then the question we ask is, if this is a competition for profit among private actors, why should it be funded by the public funds? And in a sense, this is really going too fast. In a sense, we have been there before. With one colleague, we wrote this paper recently, I think is just last year, where we compared two assessments. One was done by the International Institute for Applied System Analysis in Vienna in the 80s, and the other was done by the European Commission in 2024. The first was about energy, the second is about on emission, sorry, on emission. And in both assessment, we are told that a large set of large models have been put together, integrated in a source of continuum where the information from one model flows into the next to realize a very scientific assessment. Now, the story is that Brian Wynne, using also the help of some insider, managed to completely debunk the 80s assessment of energy policy. I mean, this assessment, by the way, argued that today we should be using energy coming from a fast breeder reactor, centralized solar energy, and synthetic fuel from carbon. None of these three technology is actually in use today to any appreciable amount, but this at the time was presented as a scientifically prescribed future. The same way in which we are told today that the digital twin are scientifically prescribing, how we should act on climate change. Here, this is really but this has become very much political. This is a case that some people has called computational colonialism. For example, model of climate change seem at ease with a future in which existing levels of inequality are maintained. And if you don't believe Balla, you can read Kanit Carr. All the references are at the end of this talk. He really looked at several assessment report of the IPCC and found that mitigation scenario, the region with capita GDP contained 60% of the world population remain below global average even in 2050. I imagine that you have similar tension, though as I said, I'm not expert in details of the ocean. I imagine that you have similar issue or tensions in your own work. In another book, which we published 3 years ago, with the same club of dissident, similar club of dissident, we argued that the models enjoy a state of exception. No, they resist falsification, they are opaque. Their complexity exceeds their reviewability. They are ritual and performative. This is a topic I cannot go much, but also the book of Haier and Oman spends a lot on the ritual component of this mathematical modeling. And then when I say that they cannot be falsified, I refer to Popper. He said that a good scientific theory should be capable of taking risks. What is a risk? It's a severe test, but a climate model projecting to 2300 or a nuclear waste safety model extended over 1 million years, or even digital twin extending over the next 50 years, these models take no risk. There is no severe test there. You can say that you have validated with information on the past, but this is not the same as a severe test. So what would help is if a model could be tested for sensitivity in the key assumption, how it responds to change in the structural framing, how is pedigree, who did it, and how it was the model funded and developed, whether the affected parties have had the opportunity to identify which assumption matter to them, and go back. Okay. All these things can be done. If you look at what I wrote on the right-hand side, the global sensitivity analysis, modeling of the modeling process, news, etc. This is where, if you wish, the bulk of my work has been for many, many years. And even today, I'm still working on these things. So these things provide tools which, in theory, could address those issues. Okay. And this is a general picture of why many of these things are linked together and to things which you may know well, like perturbed physics ensemble is the same as global sensitivity analysis, which look very much like robustness analysis. Okay, I don't want to go more into that, but this would be the universe of things which you could do to fix some of the issue I have analyzed. But the problem is that all these historically lacked traction. In other words, though people know about this approach, they are not taken. This happened with sensitivity analysis, this happened with robustness analysis, this was noted by econometricians, this was noted by statisticians, because of supply side incentive, because of conspicuous cognition, which I mentioned, institutional lock-in, because modeling infrastructure create constituencies, and these constituencies want to keep receiving funds. And the absence of institutional demand. At the end of the day, the politicians like models neutrality. This book was published in 1985 by with Donna Meadows, and she makes interestingly, she makes a very similar consideration in the 80s. And also already in the 80s, she says, "Oh, we have known these things for a long time, but nobody does it." So it's really interesting that. Okay, so there are other activists, other alternative, even more political, stat activism, where people mobilize around alternative numbers. This is something very much done by the French and the people in official statistics. Counter modeling, when you let different constituencies compete with different models. Critical fluency is when sociologists of quantification can work with modeling community. Observatory, it would be nice to have observatory who look at those numbers which are produced. So we have at this point, if the method which we think could work lack traction, what are the alternatives? Well, to conclude, I offer three possible alternatives. One, as I said, a renegotiation through institutional reform, whereby people done stat activism, for example, gain more power, or feminist standpoint theory develops to cover this ground and receive wider reception than it is today the case. The other possibility would be to work via negativa. This is something I do often. I find much more effective to falsify something than to prove this is something that is true. This is very much Popperian, no? But via negativa is an expression coined by Nassim Taleb in his many books. I cannot say what good model governance looks like, but I can say what it must not be. And finally, and this is the most difficult slide for me to present, is that we need some kind of, no, maybe we are already through some kind of true deep transformation of society. Because if Chapin and Schaeffer are right, that solution to the problem of knowledge are solution to the problem of social orders, this is a point which was made also by Lyotard. If this is true, and if you believe, as I believe, that we are going through a process of deep change in our social order, okay, call it social order, call it international order, whatever you want to call it, it's clear that we are crossing a period of intense transformation. It would really be surprising that the epistemology, the way we use science would not be affected. In fact, in my thesis, that not only science is affected, but science is a driver of this transformation. Okay, this is the list of reference quoted in the paper, and I think I'm finished here. I'll leave this slide on maybe a second. Thank you very much.